I think people know, generally speaking, how to set goals for themselves, but how would you go about setting goals for a team?
Yeah, that's good. And this is an important aspect of being a people developer because we all know when we put goals in front of us, it does help us get to that quicker. Especially, everyone's probably heard this. You're 50% more likely to do the goal if you write it down. Um, so when you're setting goals for teams, I really do like this acronym. It's the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time constrained. I know some people think it's ran its course. Honestly, I think it's a really good acronym to use. It's easy to remember. And again, you can say you've made a SMART goal, which just makes sense. So I think if you're making goals for teams, you can break it down into broad categories and then specific categories. And you allow it to kind of attach itself. And here's what I mean. Your broad categories might be budget, schedule, the how you do what you do on the project. These are broad category type goals. So, for example, it might be we're going to come under budget, within schedule, ethically, and we're going to make sure we communicate well with the client. That can be a goal right there, and that's a broad goal. Now, I would say you don't really come up with more than 2 or 3 broad goals at a time. So, whatever your period of time is for this goal, make sure you don't come up with more than 2 or 3, because past that, it just starts to get a little convoluted and a little too complex for people to keep track of them. But from the broad goals, then break it down into small goals that people can turn into initiative plans, if you will, action plans. And so if you're one of your goals was to stay under budget and stay within the schedule for a project, if that's one of your goals, obviously it needs to be time bound. So what time period are we talking about? First quarter of the year, first half of the year? And then from there, make some small goals for individuals on your team on how they can achieve this. It might be we need to do a report every 2 weeks on the budget. I need a report every 2 weeks, and then you're going to get it in an hour before the due date so that we can all review it together. It could be as simple as that. Now that has turned into action plans. I like to use Microsoft Teams. This is something that's actually newer to me as far as me using it within people development. But I think it's a great tool to be able to do a collaborative center where you can do goals like this on there. There's lots of different softwares you can use for goal setting. I would say keep it simple as best as possible. The more you complicate the system, the more people get lost within those goals. Um, if you guys have ever read, if the audience has ever read the book Measure What Matters by John Dewar, he was at Intel and at Google. He has a great system talking about OKRs, which is objectives and key results. Kind of reminds you of KPIs or something similar to that. But the point is if you don't put what the goal is, you don't put the objective, it's not specific. If it's not a time constrained component to it, and if it's not realistic and it's too convoluted, then the teams are not going to follow those goals. And then, I guess, to put the cherry on top, the thing that you have to do is remember to always come back to it. Patrick Liccioni likes to say chief reminding officer. And I think it's a funny term. It's kind of easy to remember, but it's true. When you're a leader of a team and you consider yourself the people developer, or if you're a coworker on the team and you consider yourself the people developer, your job then becomes that accountability piece, the glue that holds it all together. And you got to become the chief reminding officer. And it's just got to be something that you put on your calendar, that you put on other people's calendar to hold them accountable to the goals that they're trying to achieve.
Well, how do you think that it's because you mentioned about smart goals and whether or not it's run its course, but do you think that there might be a case for smart goals being more effective for teams than individuals? Like if an individual doesn't particularly like that approach, but it might be better for a team, do you think that there might be something to that?
Yeah, that's a good point of view because the SMART acronym definitely is something that if when you try to put it into personal goals, it can be a little bit too constraining. It feels like you're putting on all these different things to a goal, and what people tend to do personally, especially when it's just an individual goal, is that they tend to make it more like check boxes than goals, right? It's like, I want to make sure that I wake up tomorrow morning, go to work and achieve something. That might be a goal for a day. And it's like, well, what is achieving, And you use the SMART acronym to make that even better. And it's like, that's great, but you tend to do check boxes for yourself. So I think it could be something more relevant for teams. And going forward, it's always been something that's just for goals in general. But when you're doing personal goals, one of the things that I like to say is just focus on one or two at a time. You know, don't get too wrapped up for making yourself 7 or 8 New Year's resolution goals. So I think you could be right in that. Maybe the SMART acronym is something more, I guess, more relative to teams than it is personally. But I think it can be used for both.
Because the reason I mention it, and I haven't thought about this until now, because you brought that up, is because one of the criticisms of SMART goals is that there are some people who think that you should make your goals, audacious, really, really big goals, so that
Mhm.
even if you don't meet them, you end up getting closer than you would if you had like a realistic goal. But if you have certain team members who, don't agree with that and they just want to see, something realistic for them to meet, you can see that like a team might get quite disheartened by having a goal which is essentially unrealistic. So,
Yeah. No, that's a good point. One of the things I think of when you say that hey, shoot for the moon and maybe you'll make it to, whatever that saying
you'll
is.
land among the stars. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll land among the stars. And that's a great way to look at it, I think. But if you're like me, when you make goals that are really unrealistic, but they might shoot you to a different goal that's better than what you could ever imagine. If you're like me, you might get a little bit discouraged in that because it feels like you didn't make the actual goal that you wanted to attain. But somewhere in the middle, I would say, is the sweet spot. Make it
Interesting.
just a little bit past so that it stretches you but doesn't scar you. You've
Mm.
probably heard that too. So yeah, that's a great point, Thomas.